Hi, welcome to another episode of Empathy in Action, where we invite people in from the community, people who give back and who are making a difference. And so I am Lynne Ansary, director of Kidsbridge Tolerance Center and also author of The Empathy Advantage, coaching children to be kind, respectful, and successful. I am so excited today inviting a friend in, Dr. Nadia Ansary, professor of psychology from Rider University, and we're going to spend 2 sessions today. We're going to focus on problems, and then we're going to do a second session on the solutions. What are problems without solutions? So we hope that you'll tune in for both of these sessions. So, without further ado, welcome Professor Nadia Ansary, friend.
Thanks for having me, Lynn. I appreciate it.
Thank you for making the time today. So we have a lot of conversations about these issues offline, and I thought it'd be nice that other people would want to hear what is going on for all of our youth. And in particular, you have a passion for Muslim youth, Muslim girls and boys, and I thought it'd be interesting for people to hear what is going on, what is the state of affairs, and what are the problems, of course, and then later on we'll delve into the solutions.
Sure. So just as background, I've been studying the issue of bullying within the Muslim community for the last 10 years. And we've seen a rise in Islamophobia and hate incidents targeting this community, in particular since 2015. And so what's happened is that, and this is not just something that, or an issue that pertains to the Muslim community, it pertains to all religious minorities in the US. And so we've seen not just an increase in bullying and hate incidents targeting Muslims, but we've also seen it with the Jewish community, the Sikh community, and the Hindu community as well.
Can you I want to interject because I was confused also and other people. How do Sikh people within the umbrella of the Muslim community? Sikhs are Muslims, Muslims are not Sikhs. I think people get confused.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly I'm not an expert on religion, but the Sikhism is a religion all unto its own. And it's often misunderstood to be part of Islam or an outshoot of Islam or Hinduism, and it is a religion unto itself. The Sikh community in particular has seen an extremely high incident of hate towards, in particular, the male Sikh individuals because of the turban.
Right.
And so I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Sikh Coalition has conducted research, and they found a 267% increase in the bullying of Sikh young men. Mm. And that's, as you noted, largely because of the wearing of the turban.
Right, and I think children in school with the turbans are also harassment, bullying.
Exactly. And so what we see is the wearing of religious symbols often increases the risk. Mm. So Muslim females wearing the hijab or the headscarf, Jewish young men wearing the yarmulke. And so the wearing of religious symbols may be a risk factor for bullying, and yet we see a religious identity, a strong religious identity, as a protective factor. And so it's really quite a paradox that a strong religious faith might protect an individual, increase their self-esteem, and give them another identity to strengthen who they are and to strengthen their coping. And yet the wearing of religious symbols may in and of itself be a risk factor.
Right, and we'll turn in solutions to that, because I've come across that research too, which is so heartwarming. Religious orientation and ethnic identity strong helps children stand up and speak out.
Absolutely.
Which is so, but we'll circle back to that in the solutions segment.
Sure, and just to add, in my own research, where I've looked at within the Muslim community, the role of ethnic identity in my research also suggests that it's a protective factor. So in addition to religious identity, ethnic identity, country of origin, belonging to a certain group, practicing the norms and cultural practices and beliefs within that group, can also be protective. So that's something that is really important from a scholarly perspective and from a prevention perspective to understand what are the risk and protective factors associated with bullying.
And so I want the listeners to know, when we talk about prevention, I mean, intervention is more active, you're intervening, but we are in the prevention business. I, as director of Kidsbridge Tolerance Center, to teach children to advocate for themselves, to tell an adult. So prevention is preventing bias and preventing discrimination and stuff like that. So
absolutely.
Your research is primarily...
So my training is as a developmental psychopathologist, and that is an applied prevention science.
You need to explain. It's getting a little geeky here. All right, so this is a what?
So developmental psychopathology
yes.
is a very specific area bridging developmental psychology, which is the understanding of change across the lifespan. So developmental psychology, fusing it with clinical psychology, which is the study of disordered behavior, psychopathology, abnormal behavior, disordered behavior, etc.
Interesting. Okay.
So my area looks at the intersection of human development and mental illness. And so it's an applied science because we want to use empirical insights, what do we learn from the research, to then point the direction for intervention and prevention.
Beautiful.
And so my work, by its very sort of nature of, you know, my training and the disciplinary focus, my work has always looked at risk and protective factors and how that can inform solutions.
Exactly. And one of the reasons I was so excited to find you and learn of your work is that there is a paucity of this work. I think for all, just in our country, that we need to spend more time on our youth today, post-COVID, even pre-COVID. We have a mental health crisis for our children. And so I think it's more important for people like you, thank you for the work that you do, but we need more research on how the children are coping developmentally, Muslim children, Jewish children, Asian children, Sikh children, Baha'i children, to better understand how we can help them, what the problems are. Like for myself, being in the Kidsbridge Tolerance Center, I was shocked maybe 15 years ago, and this is what really alerted me, that the children would share, and the Muslim children said they were called terrorists. And it happened time and time again. And what a thing for a child to live with, that they are viewed, you know, in terms of self-esteem and self-agency, that they are now the other, you know,
sure.
and the trauma that goes with that otherness for very young children.
Well, and it's interesting because, interesting and sad, right, that Muslim equals terrorist in mainstream media, and there's a lot of misinformation also in our schools about Islam, and Islam is not portrayed in a fair and modern light, and the focus for the last, you know, since 9/11 has been on 9/11 as a focal point in American history, which it is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all Muslims ascribe to these, you know, very, you know, fanatical ways of thinking about religion and politics together.
Minority, but we have we lose our sense of proportions in this society, in the media, of course.
Sure, and even in just general conversations with folks about Muslims, there's sort of an assumption a lot of times that Muslims are un-American or that they're immigrant groups. Muslims are long-standing Americans. You know, Muslim American students are, you know, for teachers, they are your students. For neighbors, they are your neighbors. And
doctors, lawyers, accountants.
Absolutely. And so Muslim and American, that hyphenated self, right? That Muslim hyphen American is really critical for us to recognize that, you know, members of this community are not other. They are part of the fabric of America. And so
we're all refugees. We really are all refugees. And Native Americans were here first. So.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so the marginalization and othering of various groups, not just Muslims, but Jews and, various folks of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, the othering is really the first step towards bullying, the first steps towards hatred, because it makes it okay. It makes it okay to joke about, makes it okay to demean, makes it okay to use stereotypes towards individuals of these various groups, and then it opens the door for harassment, intimidation, and bullying.
So let's talk about how young this starts, because the research, as limited as it is really alarming that children can feel HIB, harassment, intimidation, and bullying 4, 5 years old.
Even 3.
Even
age 3.
So that's why we are in the prevention field and want others to understand that we have to start earlier with this anti-bias education, which Kidsbridge is getting into now. We have a preschool program. Another program we have that I think is so valuable, I don't know if they're teaching religion in school anymore, is the Golden Rule, where in every religion, treat others as you would like to be treated. So we really need to espouse this and teach younger kids so that ideally that they grow up and they're going to be kinder and the otherness recedes. So we're hoping for the next generation this goes better. So tell us about your research. I don't know how young your research goes, but what are you finding? Do you research girls and boys?
Yes.
And so what are you finding out, I guess good and bad, with your research?
So in general, the samples that I have worked with are ages 12 to 18, and then so within, middle school to high school, and then my more recent work has looked at college populations. And I've found that a prevalence rate of around 27 to 30%, a prevalence rate of bullying within the community, which is significantly higher than national averages. So the Centers for Disease Control and the National Center for Education Statistics both report the annual bullying rates around 19%, 19 or 20%.
Is your research national? It's not just New Jersey.
Actually, my research is not national.
Okay.
So recruiting from the Muslim American community is particularly difficult because there is a lot of fear within the community about how their information is going to be used. And so
when you assure them it's anonymous, they're still afraid.
It still doesn't.
Okay.
It's necessary to gather the sample to make those assurances, but because we need consent from both parents and children in this type of research.
Wow.
So my samples are much smaller than I would have liked.
Yeah.
But my research does both a quantitative, like a survey-based focus, as well as focus groups. So what's unique about it is that we can understand how frequently this happens and what are the variables that make it more likely or less likely for someone to be harassed, intimidated, and bullied.
Interesting.
But then I also have the focus groups, which then explain the process behind the numbers with my participants, in my participants' own words. And so those focus groups were very interesting because I started to learn about how identity is affected by Islamophobia and by these experiences, and how for some kids there is an experience of shame about their Muslim identity.
Sadly,
yes. And hiding that identity until they're comfortable with either a friend or a group that they can then sort of out themselves as Muslim. And so that information was really telling to me. The other thing that I found was that roughly 50% of the sample reported being afraid of being bullied. Not that they had been bullied, but that there was this anxiety about being bullied. And I think those numbers are probably higher today than they were several years ago when I collected those data.
Cyberbullying, so they can be bullied in school, they can be bullied online. Does your research look into the
Yes.
universe of cyberbullying and that anxiety getting online? You never know what you're going to read, and bots are spreading false information. So what does that look like for a Muslim child online?
So my data were collected several years ago, and my rates were around 10 to 12% on cyberbullying. The national rates are around 15%, but those are more recent statistics. Hinduja and Pachin are researchers who have specialized in exploring cyberbullying, and they look at religious minorities. They're one of the only folks who have data, and these data are available online.
Wow.
And they parse it out by religious groups.
Oh, good.
Muslims are report around a 30% rate of cyberbullying. When you compare that with the national average of around 15%, now again, I'm sort of trying to make these comparisons across different data sets.
Yes.
But if we make that comparison, it's roughly double what the national average is. And we see similar rates for Jews as well, but it's less than what we see for Muslims in terms of cyberbullying.
Right. That makes me really sad, cyberbullying, because when we were kids, you leave school 3 o'clock, the bullying, the meanness, the name calling stopped. And now for kids today, it's 24/7. So that's very difficult. So why do you do this work? What was there a moment in time that you thought you saw the paucity of research and you thought, this is something I want to do? You're raising 2 Muslim children. What struck a chord for you, and why do you do this, and how does this make you feel?
Sure. So as a Muslim American and as a parent of 2 Muslim children, it's personal for me and for my community. As a scholar, I feel that I can shed light on the issue and again try to inform these prevention, areas for the community. But what's interesting about sort of my path is that the more that I explored Islamophobia and bullying within my community, the more I realized it was not a Muslim issue and is not a Jewish issue. It is an issue of any minority, LGBTQ plus individuals, any minority group is at risk for bullying. And with the rise of hate that we've seen over the last 7 years or so, I feel like we feel as though we have to do more to advocate and make a change.
So in the second section, we're going to focus on solutions, but I want to circle back to the problem of parents. And so again, bias. In the face of bias, parents and some teachers, but not all teachers, are not trained, and they don't know what to do. And we're still fighting this man up kind of, attitude, man up. And it made me, I was lecturing once and a guy came up to me, it made me the man I am today. Well, some kids are, scarred, low self-esteem. They may have to go to another school. And children today are harming themselves. So this is very, very serious. So I wanted you to spend maybe a couple minutes on the challenge we face with Muslim adults. Some of them may be immigrants from another country. Some may be uncomfortable standing up and speaking out. They don't know how, they're not practiced, or they're afraid. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think you mentioned most of it, Lynn. A lot of immigrant Muslim families are afraid to cause ripples, don't draw attention to yourself or make a big deal. And truly, a lot of Muslim kids don't report bullying. We know that in general, in terms of the bullying literature, we know that a lot of children don't report. But we see that even more with Muslim kids. And in my own research, in the focus groups that we conducted, a lot of times the kids said things like, I didn't want to bother my parents. I didn't want to burden them because they're already dealing with, sort of the typical immigrant issues of, language barriers, economic struggles, et cetera. So they didn't want to burden their parents.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very interesting thing that we need to be sensitive to. So in terms of Muslim American parents, I think it's important to understand that, if you know that your child's being bullied, it's important to get acquainted with the anti-bullying policy of the school and demand that the school act on those policies. And you may need an advocate with you. You may need a translator with you. You may need someone to bridge that cultural gap if it exists. But there has to be a call for action on the part of the parent requiring the school to do something.
Right. I was just thinking about the Afghan community. I know there were 15,000 Afghanis or Afghani families in Fort Dix, and so they now, I think, are out and about New Jersey and other states, and that challenge and difficulty, whereas they're just trying to survive, and these are not going to be the kind of parents who probably don't speak English with Muslim kids, that the kids may not be wearing the right clothes or wearing the right food, that it's just an uphill battle. And if we could purposefully train children and teachers and counselors to welcome them and make them feel, in fact, I just saw a video of 2 Ukrainian kids going to a school, and like the whole school was in the lobby applauding these 2 poor Ukrainian children, and they were bewildered and they didn't know what to look at and how to react to that overwhelming. But not saying that's the right way to do that, but just to welcome kids who have been othered or who are refugees or whatever. So we have a long ways to go, including the parents. Back to like when I faced issues of bias or discrimination, I would never tell my parents. And I don't know, is there research on that? Do most kids not tell their parents? But they've never been educated how to do it.
Sure.
It's okay to tell your parents, and this whole snitching culture too, I think is harmful.
Well, there's so many things that you said that I wanted to respond to. First, regarding refugees, we have to also recognize that they're particularly vulnerable. They may have trauma histories coming in, and so they're particularly vulnerable. So educators, community members, it's important for them to recognize that this is a very vulnerable group who may need additional support. The other thing is that for parents, in terms of, and again, we keep talking about the problem and the solution together because it's hard to sort of disconnect those two.
Indeed.
But it's really critical for parents to keep the lines of communication open with kids, and particularly teens who are starting to separate a little bit, spend more time with their peers, and the peer context sort of gains salience during adolescence. It's really important for parents to push through and continue to connect so that they can keep the lines of communication open. And if there are warning signs that a child may be bullied, they could follow up on that. And so that's also an important prevention, from a prevention standpoint, is keeping the lines of communication open between parents and kids.
Right. And because my fascination, my obsession is empathy, that the parents in a unit where everybody needs to be more empathetic, that the parents can be more empathetic to walk in the shoes of their children who may be struggling, that the children also can walk in the shoes of their parents who are maybe in a new culture or who don't want to, advocate for themselves or their family. So walking in other shoes, I think, is a system upon which it can inform and fuel prevention strategies that everybody really needs to be helping each other. More active listening, which we'll talk about in the next session for solutions. So.
Sure, and I think for parents to share those stories of discrimination in the workplace, or stories of growing up that may not paint them in the most lovely light, but to say, yes, I've experienced that too. Here's how I handled it, or here's how I wish I'd handled it, or here's what I would have liked to have said to my parents. And it opens the door, to have those connections. So the sharing of stories, I think, is also important.
That's a really good point. So I think that's a powerful way. So when I'm talking to fourth graders in the Tolerance Center, I would say, when I was in fourth grade, you know, I was teased and I was bullied, and how I handled it. And you can hear a pin drop because the kids see me as this very confident grown-up adult, and it's, oh my goodness, it happened to her too. And I think it lessens the isolation. They don't feel so othered and unique. So that is a powerful strategy.
Sure, and you know, bullying is associated with shame, oftentimes, for the target. And to acknowledge that shame, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, but there is that feeling of shame, which is not always rational, right? And so it is important to sort of, you know, let kids know that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay. This is the only way that I can help you, is if I know.
Yeah. So a lot of work to do.
Absolutely.
So I think we're going to stop part 1 and move to part 2, where we're going to be looking at the positive side of solutions. We'll use the empathy lens to see that we can inform teachers, kids, parents, and see if we can figure out a way to move forward in a very positive way. So thank you for coming. For problems, don't go away. We'll be exploring solutions. So I want to thank you for visiting us today, Empathy in Action, using an empathy lens. So delighted to have my friend here, Dr. Ansary, who's done a lot of primary research on understanding bias, discrimination against Muslim youth. And in our next session, we will be exploring solutions. Hopefully you'll learn some things, maybe a couple tips, and maybe there's a couple things that you can do. So thanks for visiting us, and we'll see you soon in part 2. Bye-bye.